Hello, my name is Jimmy Song, and in this talk, I'm going to talk about how Bitcoin changes incentives. There's a lot of things to talk about here. I'm going to separate this talk into four different levels. We're going to talk about how Bitcoin changes incentives at the individual level. And then we're going to go up a level higher at the company level. And then we're going to go up a level higher than that, and that's the nation level. And finally, we're going to talk about the global level, or how it affects pretty much everyone in society. But first, let's start at the individual level. And at the individual level, we need to recognize something. There is no easy way to store value in the world today. And this is pretty obvious by the fact that the M2 money supply has increased significantly. This is you can think of this as all of the US dollars there are in the world. In 1959, this was $286.6 billion. In 2020, this was, I think, as of March. Currently, it's something like $18.5 trillion. And that's a significant increase over the past 61 years. And if you annualize that, that ends up being something like 7% annualized. This is in significant contrast to Bitcoin, which is increasing at around 1.3% per year. Just to see how insane this number is, just in the week of March 23rd, 2020, the M2 money supply increased $370 billion. This is well over the market cap of Bitcoin, and it's more than the entire money supply was in 1959. Now, why do I say that there's no easy way to store value? Well, clearly the dollar isn't it, because it is expanding by 7% a year. The traditional stores of value are these. It's real estate, stocks, and gold. And these all have high friction. They cost a lot in order to transact, unless you get fake gold or something like that. And that makes them pretty expensive to store value in. If you have real estate, you have to pay real estate taxes. If you have stocks, you have commissions to pay, and so on. And as a result of the fact that there aren't really good stores of value, we end up spending a lot of effort on storing and creating. If you know anyone that is rich, you know very quickly that most rich people spend an inordinate amount of time on research, because if you're going to invest in real estate or stock or something like that, you're going to have to find just the right property or just the right stock. And that's not very easy. Oftentimes what people will do is just invest in the S&P 500. And even there, it turns out that there's something called an index fund bubble, in large part because people take that strategy way too much. The other strategy that a lot of people take is basically, if you don't need to store value, if there's no value, they end up spending a lot of their money rather than taking all this effort in order to try to preserve whatever the value there is. And as a result of that, what you end up getting at the individual level are asset inflation, materialism, and consumption. And I'll explain what each of these pictures mean. The first one is a New York taxi cab medallion. This is issued by the city of New York through the Taxi and Limousine Commission. For a long time, they weren't that expensive. In the 80s, each of these medallions was going for something like $50,000. But as a result of their known scarcity and a lot of hedge funds not really having a good place to park their money, they ended up buying up these medallions. Until Uber came along, these were trading at around $2 million each. The next one is a Michael Jordan rookie card, and this is a Fleer Gem Mint 10 rookie card. It's worth a lot of money in large part because people use it as a store of value, like the taxi cab medallion. And then the third one is a Rothko painting. Now, all of these have some utility. If you have a New York City taxi cab medallion, you can drive a cab. If you're a fan of Michael Jordan, it can decorate your home. Or if you're a fan of Rothko paintings, that can decorate your home as well. But they have a premium on top of the asset value beyond the utility value, and that's what I would call the store of value premium that each of these things have. And as a result of that, these things tend to go towards people that are trying to store value and not necessarily use them. And this happens all over the world. I'm told that in China, there's a large number of apartments that are simply vacant, but people use them to invest regardless because real estate tends to be a good store of value. So a lot of homes are going to people that are investing rather than people that want to live in them. The next two things are a diamond chain Chanel handbag and a Bugatti car. Both of these are enormously expensive. The handbag is, I think, $300,000. The car is $10.5 million. When it's very difficult to store value, you might as well sort of live it up and buy these things. And enjoy the money while you can. And the third one is a rapper that's eating a gold leaf covered donut. That donut, if I'm not mistaken, costs $5,000 because of all of the ingredients that get in. This is the typical thing that happens when you don't have a very good store value, a good place to park your money. The fiat system is designed so that you are constantly spending money rather than parking it. So they make stores of value very difficult by taxing it and making it have a lot of friction and so on. All that is to say is that at the individual level, there's a much bigger emphasis on survival and not entrepreneurship. Whereas in sound money economy, what you have are a lot of entrepreneurs that are trying to make money. In a fiat money economy, what you have is everyone just trying to survive. They're running on a treadmill that's essentially created by this money printer go burr meme. There's a lot of money printing, and that creates this treadmill effect where in order to even stand still, you have to keep running, you have to keep making money, you have to keep investing and so on. And it's very damaging at an individual level, as I showed in the previous slide. Now, how does Bitcoin fix all this? Well, there is an easy way to store value when you have Bitcoin, because you can just put the money in Bitcoin and not worry about storing value, and you can instead focus on creating. There isn't asset inflation, there isn't materialism, there isn't as much consumption. Instead, there's a lot more entrepreneurship, a lot more businesses, a lot more goods and services that are created. In essence, you have individuals that are building civilization instead. Now, what's the next level? The next level is at the company level, and like it or not, this is how people are organized. In the ancient times, this would be tribes, or tribes rather than companies, but it is companies now. First thing to recognize is that there is a giant Cantillon effect. Now, Richard Cantillon was an economist in England back in the 1700s who noticed that the first spenders of inflation or monetary expansion tended to do very well, whereas the last spenders did not. The big thing to recognize is that most of this money is going towards companies. Most of the newly printed money goes towards companies, and this is through commercial banks. These are not banks that you go and deposit consumer funds in. These are not consumer banks. They're commercial banks. They lend to companies, and this is where most of the money goes. And they are the beneficiaries of the Cantillon effect, and they have an enormous advantage over everybody else. Here are some of the possible ways in which they can take an advantage, and really all of these advantages are what I would call debt-fueled growth, because on the books they come out as debt. Now you can underprice your competition. This is the Walmart or Amazon strategy. That's the first picture there. And underneath that is another strategy, which is to just hoard all of the best people and pay them more than any of your competitors. This is what I would call the Google or Facebook strategy. The third picture there is sort of regulatory moats This is basically lobbying that you can do in order to get favorable regulations so that you could keep out competitors. And last but not least, if you have no other choice, what you can do is do a stock buyback, or if you have competitors that are smaller, you can just go buy them out, do a leverage buyout. And this happens all the time. All that is to say that it becomes a winner-take-all economy. And I put a picture of a unicorn up there because if you're familiar with what a unicorn is, at least in VC terminology, a unicorn is a company that is worth over $1 billion. VCs are not stupid. They recognize all of the structural advantages that giant companies have, all of those things on the last slide. But you can't get those advantages until you are a certain size. So they push for these companies to get over that threshold so they can have these advantages over other companies. And as a result of this, there's an emphasis on size and not innovation. So companies essentially focus on becoming bigger and bigger and not actually innovating or providing new goods and services to the market. And this cartoon illustrates exactly what kind of innovation that it actually produces. It's not innovation that benefits civilization. It is innovation to manage people more effectively. And that is essentially what every company ends up focusing on. So how does Bitcoin fix this? Well, there is no Cantillon effect. There is no debt fuel growth. There is no winner-take-all economy. So ultimately, that means that there is much more of an emphasis on innovation and new goods and services instead of size. The world right now has a lot of companies that are just gigantic, and they have an advantage that isn't natural versus smaller companies. If you think about it, small companies actually have a lot of incumbent advantages, like the fact that you can know everybody in a small company, and they can be a lot more responsive to the needs of the population that they serve, and so on. But instead, what we have are these behemoth companies that are horribly inefficient and have a lot of people that are rent-seeking. And that, unfortunately, is the current reality, which Bitcoin can definitely fix. Now, let's go on to the next level. We've covered the individual and company level. Let's go on to the nation level. So the first thing to recognize is that at the nation-state level, it's essentially a system to support the companies that are within those borders. We've already talked about the central bank and how they loan out money to the company. Large part of the newly printed money goes towards companies. But think about something like the education system. It takes a very creative human being and spits out a cog for a particular for companies that are out there. Something like an accountant, an engineer, or a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. These are very specific roles that people end up playing so that they can replace parts in a company rather than being something created, something that that only you can do, and so on. Think about regulations. They are essentially there to support companies, in large part because the lobbyists can only be afforded by the larger companies. Even the healthcare system in the United States is very employer or large company centric, in the sense that if you're a small company, it is very hard to get good health insurance, and they've set up the system that way for that. And the reason why this is because they have the control of money, and that means that there is a giant moral hazard. And with this moral hazard, if you are able to create money, or if you are able to print money, you have the ability to reward whoever you want, and this leads to a lot of rent-seeking behavior. Like this cartoon here, assistant to the aid of the deputy vice chairman of the committee to reduce Pentagon bureaucracy. It's a title that's kind of meaningless, but this guy keeps getting paid. A rent seeker essentially is somebody that can tax a transaction without adding any value, and that's what tends to happen in a fiat economy because of the ability to print money. And that means that government tends to be completely disconnected from price. Now, if you're not familiar with healthcare.gov in the United States, essentially this was called Obamacare. And they decided to have this website so that people can go register for health insurance and buy government mandated insurance. It turned out that when the website launched that it was a miserable failure and that it couldn't even have 50 concurrent users, and there were literally millions of people trying to log in at the same time. What was discovered later was that the entire website was really poorly built, but Congress had spent something like $700 million and 18 months in order to build this from some small company in Chicago. Of course, they found out it was broken and everyone was embarrassed. So they went out and hired a couple of Google engineers who told them, okay, well, we need to hire some more people and figure this thing out. They actually patched it, got it to work a little bit, but they said, you know what, this website is so bad, we're just going to have to rewrite the whole thing from scratch. They hired some people and they asked them, okay, how much money do you need? And they said, well, I think we can do it for $10 million. And in 9 weeks. And they, of course, met that deadline. $10 million 9 weeks versus $700 million and 18 months. How was it possible that they were able to do it for 70 times cheaper and 20 times faster? Well, it's because government is completely disconnected from price. They don't really care about that. It's about handing out favors. All that is to say that government tends, or nations tend to think that they have a much larger purview and a moral imperative, and this is the problem of politicians. Essentially, they promise everything but deliver nothing. Yes, we can, but we probably won't, because really they can't really do that much. All they can do is print more money, and they think that they can solve it by printing more money and putting those resources. But really, you're taking from other people, and that ends up being a detriment to the entire country. So how does Bitcoin solve all this? Well, there's, governments stop becoming systems to support companies. They don't have control of money. That means that they have to care a lot more about price. They're a lot more budget conscious. And that means that they don't try to solve every problem for everybody. Instead, they are much more limited in scope. And that's what Bitcoin solves at the nation level. Let's finally go to the global level, because this is the most important one. The first thing to recognize is that we are under a dollar hegemony, and this is the result of World War II, but essentially the entire world runs on the dollar. And if you didn't know that before, it certainly is very obvious to everyone now, because there is a giant liquidity crunch and everyone wants the dollar. Now, what does that mean? That means that there's a global Cantillon effect. That means that the first spenders of the money, basically people in the US, get a lot more benefit versus everybody else. And these poor suckers in the third world countries end up having to hyperinflate. And everyone sort of knows this instinctively, but they don't really know why. Well, this is the reason why. The US has a giant advantage over everybody else. This is why it doesn't necessarily makes sense for a lot of people to stay in their country if they have the opportunity to move to the US, because that's where all the money is. And unfortunately, that means that the wealth of other countries suffers as a result. And that means that there's a very poor use of human capital because of the global Cantillon effect. That means that everybody in those other countries, especially third world countries, well, all those people are trying to save their own hide, and they're not contributing to civilization. And all of those problems that I outlined in the first three sections are much, much worse in countries other than the US, and especially in third world countries. And that means that people's talents aren't utilized very well. And ultimately, that means that there's interdependence and fragility. Because the US causes everything, you have an entire economy, world economy, that is fragile to what's going on in the US. And we can see this even right now during this pandemic, is that the entire economy of the world is on the brink of collapse because of what's happening in because of this one little thing. Now, how does Bitcoin fix this? Well, first of all, there is no dollar hegemony. There's a Bitcoin, instead of the US controlling everything, you have a politically neutral money in Bitcoin. And that means that there's no global Cantillon effect. The human capital is allocated a lot better. Instead of everybody, all the smartest people moving to the US or something like that, you have people staying where they are and trying to make the best of what of the countries that they're in. Instead of interdependence and fragility, you have independence and anti-fragility. You have a lot of different states trying different things. You have more solutions. You have more independence. You have more innovation at a global level, which helps in every way. All that is to say that Bitcoin changes incentives at all of these levels. And how does it change incentives? Essentially, it takes out the favorable few from positions of power and gives that power to everybody else in relatively equal portion. And that means that no one has an unfair advantage over everybody else. And it's instead about the world becomes much more of a meritocracy. Thank you very much for this chance to talk. Hope you have a great rest of the conference.